Good morning. I am Adrian Lee, the Program and Partnership Manager at PBSS. I would like to welcome you to the PBSS webinar, Advances in Metabolic Therapeutics for Obesity, Diabetes, and MASH. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type in your questions by clicking on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. On your post-attendee screen, there will be a short survey. Please take a moment to give us your thoughts. If there are any technical glitches during the session, please be patient as we work on correcting them. And now let me introduce you to Shicheng Mao, the president of PBSS.
Hi. Thank you, Adrian. Let me show my desktop. Do you see my full screen?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Shicheng Mao, president of Pharmaceutical and Bioscience Society. Welcome to this PBSS webinar on the advances in metabolic therapeutics for obesity, diabetes, and MASH. This event is jointly organized with Ipsos, a global market research company, and PBSS thanks Eric Bloim, a senior VP at Ipsos, for recruiting the two top-notch speakers today. Here is our standard disclaimer, which basically says that the presentations are the opinions of the speakers and do not represent those of PBSS. And the information is not meant for decision-making purposes. We also thank Wilson Sonsini, a premier law firm, for their pro bono service to PBSS. Since some of you are new to PBSS, let me say a few words to overview who we are and what we do. We are a life science-focused nonprofit society that originated in the San Francisco Bay Area over 20 years ago. And now, with 7 chapters globally, including the San Francisco Bay Area, Boston, San Diego, Seattle, Vancouver, Korea, and more recently, Japan. And with over 20,000 members and participants like you. Our mission is to promote advances in life science, as well as provide training on diverse topics in drug discovery and development through seminars, symposia, and workshops. We have a top-notch program and operations team, but we heavily rely on scientific contributions from scientists like you to organize meetings like this one. We have a strong leadership team, and these are the leaders of the 7 chapters. And the San Francisco Bay Area also has a very large committee with 20+ committee members representing large companies like Merck, Genentech, Gilead, and many smaller companies. We also have 4 distinguished advisors, including Professor Kevin Grimes of Stanford Medical School, Dr. Mike Varney, former head of early research and early development at Genentech, Dr. Cyrus Karjeste, and also Dr. Omar Durmat. This is a typical in-person workshop we organize frequently with several hundred attendees. And for pretty much all of our events, we also have webcast to people who are not local. And here is a representative list of meetings we've organized recently on very diverse topics in life science and drug discovery and development, such as new modalities, bioavailability, highlights of recent advances in oncology clinical development, success stories and lessons learned from recent approvals, the science and stories of promising biotech startups, preclinical development and IND filing of antibody therapeutics or small molecule therapeutics, and so on. And we also started a lab course series on topics like preclinical development, preclinical formulation development, chromatography, LCMS, immunoassays, biomarker analysis, and so on. And here is a list of our upcoming events. Obviously, today is a webinar on metabolic therapeutics. And in February, actually, we have 7 events across multiple chapters, including Biopharma Strategy 101, formulation development for antibodies and proteins, protein CMC, recent developments in clinical pharmacology, drug discovery for rare diseases. This one is organized by our Japan chapter. The science and stories of promising biotech startups, oncology preclinical models. This one goes to March. Oncology preclinical models and pharmacology studies for translational research. Development of radiopharmaceuticals. This one will be in late March. And in April, we have 4 events. Business development partnership in Boston. Medical affairs in the Bay Area. Small molecule preclinical development and IND filing. And on April 30th, we're going to test out a new format on Vendor Scientific Highlights Symposium. This one on DMPK and bioanalytical technologies. And this event will be completely free in person, including lunch for the scientist attendees. And this one will be sponsored by the presenting companies. And in May, we're in the process of scheduling a workshop in the Bay Area on antibody protein formulation development. June 11th, we're going to have a joint workshop with the Antibody Society on antibody preclinical development and IND filing. In the summer, we're going to take a break in organizing in-person events. However, we'll be busy in organizing several online-only events, so stay tuned. Coming in the fall, in September, we're going to have a small molecule human PK and dose projection workshop. And also, we're going to have a 3-day course on in vitro ADME studies in collaboration with UK Drug Metabolism Discussion Group. We heavily rely on scientists like you for suggestions on topics and speakers for our upcoming events. So if you have some good ideas about some topics and speakers, including yourself, please don't be shy. Please don't send an email to info@pbss.org. Please also find us and like us on LinkedIn under PBSS International and repost our activities. We'd like to thank our corporate sponsors, Wilson Sonsini, a premier law firm, and Emory Pharma, a San Francisco Bay Area-based analytical and bioanalytical CRO, for their corporate sponsorship to make these online events possible. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce my PBSS colleague, Dr. Dean Wilson, who is the Program Management Chair of PBSS. Dean and his capable team of program management work very hard to make these events happen behind the scene. Here you go, Dean.
Thank you, Shishang. Adrian, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Dean Wilson here. Thank you for the kind introduction, Shishang. So yes, I'm the program director at PBSS, and I will be introducing our speakers and also moderating the panel discussion at the end of their presentations. So as you can see, we have a full agenda. Our speakers, Scott Morano and Roberto Cortese, have joined us from Ipsos. They have spoken at a previous event, so if you are a PBSS veteran, you may recall them from an event we had in 2024. So the topics for today include the recent milestones in cardiovascular metabolic disease. We'll have a section around scientific and clinical developments. Also, sort of a market assessment, the latest deals and acquisitions, the landscape there. Current and pending drugs and developments, and then an overview of clinical trial status and asset status in the clinic, designs, mechanisms of action, efficacy and safety, etc., and then some comparative analysis. I'll add at this point, one thing to consider is if questions that arise during the presentations are of a very, very highly technical nature. Scott and Roberto specialize more in the market analysis and commercial landscape. So if any questions are highly technical, we may need to refer back to you after the event. So at any rate, as you can see from the agenda, we'll have their presentation, and then we'll follow up with about a 30-minute panel discussion. Attendees online, at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A box. So as we go through the presentations, please use that Q&A box to input your questions, and we will aim to get to as many of those as we possibly can during the panel discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome our speaker, Scott Morano, who, as you can see, Senior Vice President at Ipsos Healthcare Custom Research, and Roberto Cortese, also Senior Vice President and Head of Ipsos's Obesity and Cardiometabolic Disease section. So Scott and Roberto, take it away.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Roberto and Scott, if you want to say, introduce yourselves. Roberto?
Yes,
Scott?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Very
If
happy.
you want to say hi to the audience.
Yes, so hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I think you would like the presentation, and yeah, more on that. Also, my background when I will start to present the slides.
Hi, good to see you all.
Thank you. We'll now go into your presentation.
Welcome to our webinar, Advances in Metabolic Therapeutics for Obesity, Diabetes, and MASH. Today, we will explore the state of art, the emerging innovation, and the road ahead across these therapy areas. I'm Roberto Cortese, and I head up Ipsos GLP-1 and cardiometabolic monitors. And with me, there is also Scott Morano, an SVP at Ipsos Healthcare. We should say up front that we are not scientists. Our perspective today comes from a commercial and market strategy lens, which brings particular value in understanding the intersection between clinical evidence, regulatory positioning, and real-world implementation. So this is the agenda for today. I will take you through the current landscape, the recent approval milestones, and the 2025 deal and acquisition activity. Scott will then focus on what's next in this landscape, and we'll get back for section 5 to explore 5 trends that are already shaping clinical access dynamics across these 3 therapy areas. And of course, at the end, we'll have time for a quick Q&A. So let's start with the current landscape, which you're probably very familiar with, but that helps set a baseline to understand the shifts that are happening. But first of all, why did we decide to focus this presentation on type 2 diabetes, MASH, and obesity only? Well, you already know the evidence and the science, so these conditions are strictly linked. You can see it from the graph on the slide. So for instance, 70% of type 2 diabetes patients present with MASLs, and 80% of MASH patients have concomitant obesity. And all these 3 conditions share insulin resistance and lipotoxicity as upstream drivers. What's novel is that recent therapeutic advances and commercial dynamics are creating a strategic shift in these areas. which has and will have repercussions on the future architecture of cardiometabolic care. Indeed, as you are aware, we finally have GLP-1s, a single therapeutic class that addresses the spectrum. And the capital markets recognize this. In 2025 alone, there's been $36 billion worth of merger and acquisitions or deal activities concentrated precisely in these three indications. And this signals industry consensus that we are transitioning from, let's say, disease-specific silos to one integrated cardiometabolic ecosystem. And that's what we will explore today. Despite recent advances, however, the burden of disease across these three conditions remain massive, and I think it would be a good idea to start from that. In obesity, we know we are facing an epidemic, but here the point is that actually we are facing an accelerating crisis. The epidemiological trajectory is well established. The World Obesity Federation estimated that by 2035, 4 billion people, that is 51% of the global population, will live with obesity. And severe obesity is the fastest growing segment in high-income nations. This is, of course, serious, as obesity is the so-called master switch of the entire cardiometabolic spectrum. Diabetes, CKD, so kidney disease and cardiovascular disease, and as well as liver disease, with ramification also well beyond cardiometabolic disease. And the calculated economic impact is striking. It is estimated that, again, by 2035, the cost of obesity will achieve $4.3 trillion annually, a massive sum, equivalent to 3% of global GDP. Despite therapeutic abundance, the unmet needs remain high also in type 2 diabetes. A few points illustrate this. So only between 44% and 50% of type 2 diabetes patients achieve glycemic targets. And cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of mortality among these patients, accounting for up to 80% of deaths. This is up to 5-fold higher than non-diabetic patients. More critically, this means that improved glucose control alone is not enough to reduce cardiovascular events, and payers increasingly recognize this distinction when evaluating GLP-1 positioning. And type 2 diabetes is also associated with another crucial unmet need, kidney protection. The CKD prevalence in type 2 diabetes is massive, yet underrated. Up to 40% of people with diabetes developed chronic kidney disease. Albuminuria in type 2 diabetes patients increases mortality 4-fold and heart failure admission 5-fold. Yet, only a minority of CKD patients are on kidney protective agents, despite recent promising clinical trial data, which we'll explore later on. And going to the liver, muscles, and its inflammatory form, MASH, are also global problems. It is estimated that between 10 and 40% of the total population has MASH, but diagnosis rates are very low, creating a sort of hidden epidemic. And considering that 11% of MASH patients have cirrhosis progression risk, this is a huge unmet need, ready to get worse also considering that MASH is now the leading indication for liver transplantation in the US. And of course, like obesity and type 2 diabetes, MASLD and MASH are also associated with other cardiometabolic comorbidities. The convergence of these clinical needs is what I would like to draw your attention to today, as this is matched by a simultaneous acceleration of regulatory breakthroughs, capital availability, and clinical practice. And payers are evolving rapidly to adapt to this reality. In other words, this is a rare moment where clinical innovation, regulatory action, and commercial incentives are all aligned, creating both opportunity and disruption. So let's start to delve into our presentation, and let's start with the shifts in the regulatory landscape, because there has been an unprecedented pace of treatment approvals recently, which redefine treatment algorithms. The timeline for the last 24 months tell a strategic story. And here is according to FDA dates. So March 2024, Rezdiffra, the first MASH drug, received accelerated approval from the FDA based on histological surrogate endpoints, establishing the proof of concept for its ability to modify fibrosis in non-cirrhotic MASH patients. In MASH, this is followed by Wegovy in August 2025. This drug also received accelerated approval for MASH based on histological data, signaling regulatory comfort with GLP-1 liver indications. In diabetes, the key date is 1 year ago, January 2025. Ozempic receives the chronic kidney disease indication thanks to what is the first dedicated renal outcomes trial. This moves GLP-1 from glucose controller to kidney protective agent. And a few dates are relevant in obesity too. So in December 2024, tirzepatide is the first pharmacotherapy approved for treating obstructive sleep apnea, OSA. This is key as OSA is a major comorbidity in obesity and a CV risk amplifier. And very recently, last month, Wegovy tablets also became the first oral therapy approved for obesity. And this context is set to change even further and soon, as the FDA is reviewing 3 submissions from Novo Nordisk: the CVD indication for Rybelsus, the oral semaglutide for type 2 diabetes, the higher dose for Wegovy in obesity with efficacy data similar to Zepbound, and CagriSema, the first GLP-1 plus amylin combination. And Scott will delve into all of these later. But now, as a final remark on this slide, I would like to say that the sequence of these milestones is key, as the regulatory system is enabling manufacturers to systematically expand indications and mechanisms. This is not random, this is a coordinated effort around market need. So all these regulatory achievements are very meaningful for current practices. And starting with obesity, the treatment landscape now start to be very differentiated, offering doctors and patients different options. Wegovy and Zepbound, 2 injectables, are the leaders, as you know. The former is a GLP-1 with robust weight loss data combined with a 20% reduction in measure adverse cardiovascular events, and recently also proven benefit in MASH, as we've just seen. The latter are dual GLP-1 GIP agonists offering higher weight loss efficacy. They both have a similar side effect profile, which is manageable, though it also fuels high discontinuation rates, which is a key unmet need in this area. Recent approvals, those that we saw in the previous slide, change this reality. There is now a pharmacotherapy, Zepbound, that can put sleep apnea into remission for about 50% of patients, offering a clinical alternative to CPAP and potentially reshaping sleep apnea management algorithms. Oral semaglutide, with its 14% weight loss approximately, validates the oral for obesity efficacy concept for the first time, providing statistical efficacy parity with the injectable version Wegovy. It also adds the convenience factor, which can address a real compliance barrier for patients, especially certain segments, add maintenance, and remove the injection barrier. All these are potentially expanding also the treated population. And so this is moving us from which drug works best to which drug works best for this patient phenotype. A shift that accelerates personalization and changes how clinical trials need to be designed going forward. Type 2 diabetes treatment is also undergoing fundamental change. So historically, the goal was simple, to lower blood sugar. The first step was to start with metformin. If that didn't work, other glucose-lowering drugs were added. Treating heart or kidneys was a bonus, not the main plan. Glucose control was the priority. In May 2024, a landmark trial, FLOW, demonstrated that GLP-1 drug, semaglutide, prevents kidney failure in patients with diabetes. It achieved 24% reduction in kidney failure risk, 18% reduction in heart attacks and strokes, and 20% reduction in death from any cause. The innovation wasn't this data, which is still very impressive. Instead, it was powering the trial on kidney outcomes as a primary endpoint. And that methodological choice altered clinical guideline recommendation within weeks and changed payer approval algorithms. And the major guidelines now recommend GLP-1 plus SGLT2 as a first line for any type 2 diabetes patients with CKD. It's not just about blood sugar, it's about preserving your kidneys. And payers welcome these, as preventing dialysis leads to huge savings. And so the strategic implication is clear. Companies pursuing future indications understand this. Trials are being designed to generate guideline-changing evidence, not incremental efficacy. This is where the competitive advantage lies. The MASH landscape has also been reshaped thanks to 2 FDA approvals in 17 months. So for the first time now in history, doctors have not one but 2 distinct tools to treat this condition. And this visual captures these 2 pillars of MASH therapy. So on the left, we have Rezdiffra, resmetirom, a liver-selective HR beta agonist. It is distinctive because it works directly inside the liver to restore lipid metabolism. And in the Maestro-NASH trial, it achieved 30% MASH resolution and 26% fibrosis improvement, proving that we can fix the liver without needing massive weight loss. On the right is Wegovy, semaglutide. This is a GLP-1 receptor agonist that takes a systemic approach. And in the Essence trial, it set a new efficacy benchmark with 63% MASH resolution and 37% fibrosis improvement. What makes it special is its metabolic leverage. So really driving this liver outcome through substantial weight loss and systemic anti-inflammatory effects. What is important here, however, is not which therapy works best. The trials were not designed to compare them. Instead, what is important is that together they transform MASH from being an untreatable condition into being a managed disease, giving doctors the flexibility to choose the right mechanism for the right patient phenotype, and also ask powerful questions. So for instance, they can ask themselves, should they choose Rezdiffra from fibrosis predominant disease, or should they choose semaglutide, perhaps for metabolic predominant disease? How can I optimize them in sequence? And should I combine them for advanced fibrosis? These are some of the questions that are being asked right now, and really they highlight where the field is moving. But 2025 was an interesting year also from the perspective of deals and acquisitions across 3 therapy areas. And this gives us a glimpse really into the future landscape. So 2025 saw almost $24 billion worth in deal value in the obesity and type 2 diabetes space. For once, GLP-1s were not the protagonists, and this is big news. Instead, the deals you see on this slide really mark a shift beyond the GLP-1 monotherapy, highlighting 3 trends. The first one is the differentiation via amylin. So the significant investment in amylin assets from Roche, from Pfizer, from AbbVie reflects a shift towards mechanisms that offer muscle mass preservation or distinct tolerability profile compared to the GLP-1 monotherapy. It also improves the patient experience, making patients feel less satisfied during a meal making patients feel satiated during a meal rather than making them stop thinking about a meal. The second trend is the Pfizer's portfolio expansion. Pfizer is determined to enter this space, and we have seen this in the bidding war, which actually was quite entertaining, with Novo Nordisk for Metsera in the autumn. Through the Metsera and Yale Pharma transactions, they have rapidly reconstructed their pipeline to include both the next generation injectables, amylin and GLP-1 combination, and also oral options. And the third trend in this activity of acquisition is that is the next generation efficacy. So licensing deals for triple agonists, Novo United Labs, and dual agonists between Regeneron and Amso indicate a continued interest in increasing weight loss efficacy and metabolic benefits beyond current standards. The deal activity was pretty hectic also in March, with a total value of almost $13 billion. And again, looking at this table, we can really point out three trends that are quite clear. The first trend is the FG-F21 convergence. So the parallel acquisitions of three FG-F21 assets, Caro, 89bio, and Boston Pharma, by major players, signal a strong industry consensus on this mechanism as a key anti-fibrotic partner to GLP-1 therapy. It's also interesting to see the entrance in this space of Roche and GSK. The second trend is the combination strategy. So Novo Nordisk's acquisition of Akero aligns with a broader strategy to combine systemic metabolic control, semaglutide, with liver-directed fibrosis reversal, the FGF21 drug from Akero, for comprehensive disease management. And finally, the third trend emerging from all these deals is the oral defense. Madrigal's licensing of an oral GLP-1 suggests a strategic priority to develop an all-oral regimen with Rezdiffra to maintain competitiveness against future injectable combinations. This strategy has been recently reinforced by a deal with Pfizer's ervogastat, announced just 10 days ago. So yeah, the landscape is clearly moving. So the themes that emerge from all this capital deployment mark a strategic inflection point in this landscape. So first, the market is consolidating around one cardiometabolic ecosystem. Obesity, MASH, and type 2 diabetes are now positioned as one interconnected metabolic spectrum. Second, the innovation frontier is moving from single mechanisms to combinations. And GLP-1 monotherapy is commoditizing. Differentiation is in combination now. For example, as we've seen, GLP-1 plus amylin or GLP-1 plus FGF21 or THR beta agonist plus an oral GLP-1. Third, type 2 diabetes is being positioned as the metabolic baseline where advanced therapies can demonstrate comprehensive organ protection and disease remission. And finally, the fourth theme emerging is that we are transitioning to precision stratification. So not this drug works for obesity, rather this drug works for patients with CKD plus obesity plus MASH. All these drugs works for patients with fibrosis predominant MASH, but not metabolic MASH. That requires different clinical trial designs and different market positioning. And I would like now to turn it over to Scott to talk in depth about some of the molecules that are currently in late-stage development and how they might shape treatment paradigms going forward.
Thank you, Roberto. In this section, we'll highlight some of the most intriguing assets that are nearing approval over the next several years. These are some of the more promising assets under development. We will take you through a high level of information about each asset, including its MOA, trial results, planned pivotal trials, and what their outlook might be. As you can imagine, we know a lot more about the assets submitted to the FDA or looking towards a potential 2026 launch. These assets have a lot of their phase 3 trial results already released. The assets farther out in development that we'll talk about have only released limited phase 2 data, so there is a lot still to be learned as trial results are released. We'll start with oral semaglutide for chronic weight management, which is under the approved trade name of Wegovy. Roberto mentioned this a little earlier. This is Novo Nordisk's oral GLP-1 receptor agonist. The indication that it has just added is for weight reduction and management for people with overweight or obesity, not type 2 diabetes. It's also indicated for a reduced risk of MACE for people with established cardiovascular disease and overweight and obesity. As a note, oral semaglutide did not inherit the MASH indication from the subcutaneous version of Wegovy. The dosing is once daily oral, and there are restrictions to the dosing, and these are the same restrictions that that oral semaglutide has as Rybelsus for type 2 diabetes. It can be taken with no more than 4 ounces of water on an empty stomach, and then wait 30 minutes before eating, drinking, or taking any other medications. Looking at the pivotal trial results, the phase 3 results that are on the label are for a mean change in body weight at week 64 of 13.6% reduction. And you can see here the percent losing 5%, 10%, or more than 20% of body weight at week 64, with nearly over 3/4 of patients losing more than 5% of their body weight, over half losing 10%. So this is a good option, well tolerated. The percent discontinuing due to adverse events for oral semaglutide was just a little bit more than placebo. And the side effect and tolerability is well known by treaters, as oral sema has been available for years as Rybelsus. Would like to take you through some of what we see as implications for oral semaglutide as it enters the market as of a few weeks ago. We think this reduces barriers for HCPs to prescribe obesity medication, especially in the primary care setting, because an oral option is just intrinsically easier for primary care to prescribe than an injectable medication. There's an increased affordability factor for patients in particular. Novo has already set a cash pay price of $149 per month, which is compared to a starting price of $199 for the subcutaneous version. There's also familiarity with the molecule and the formulation, and that should really help adoption, as should the ability for subcutaneous users to switch to oral if they would prefer, and that's at least in the short term before orforglipron is approved. Speaking of which, the next asset we'll take a look at is orforglipron for chronic weight management, which Eli Lilly has already submitted to the FDA. It is another oral GLP-1 receptor agonist. What was submitted for indication is weight reduction or management for people with overweight or obesity, not type 2 diabetes. There is a planned 2026 submission for type 2 diabetes later in the year. Its dosing is a once daily oral with no food or water restrictions. These are the results for the orforglipron and chronic weight management, the pivotal trial results that were submitted. There are 6 phase 3 trials completed. We'll take a look at the ATTAIN-1 trial details, which was conducted among over 3,000 adults with obesity or overweight without type 2 diabetes. You can see the mean change in body weight at week 72 is 12% weight loss. And we can see, again, similar to what we saw for oral Wegovy, over 3/4 of the patients losing more than 5% of their body weight, over half losing 10%. The tolerability and safety is consistent with the GLP-1 class. We had a little over 10% of patients discontinuing due to adverse events, 3% for placebo. On this slide, we're also mentioning the ATTAIN-MAINTAIN trial results, and that was taking a look at orforglipron as a potential maintenance therapy. What Lilly had done was take the respondents who achieved a weight loss plateau on Zepbound or Wegovy from the Zepbound SURMOUNT-5 trial, and then gave them orforglipron as maintenance therapy. And what we saw with that was the patients who switched from Wegovy to orforglipron only had a less than 1% weight change after after 52 weeks with treatment with orforglipron. For Zepbound, it was a 5% weight increase. But again, that suggests that this could be a convenient maintenance treatment to maintain weight loss from prior injectable therapies. We'll now take a look at the phase 3 trial results for orforglipron in type 2 diabetes. As a reminder, Lilly has not submitted this yet, but they plan to later this year. These are some of the trials in type 2 diabetes that were conducted. There were more than 6,000 patients across these trials. The first on the bar chart is ATTAIN-2, which was people with obesity or overweight and type 2 diabetes, where we can see the A1C reduction of nearly 2 points. The ACHIEVE-1 trial looked at type 2 diabetes patients without any kind of additional treatment, so diet and exercise alone, and that was minus 1.5 on the A1C. ACHIEVE-5 looked at type 2 diabetes using basal insulin with or without metformin or SGLT2s. And again, we're seeing nearly a 2% decline in A1C. ACHIEVE-2 was head-to-head against dapagliflozin, which is marketed as Farxiga. And that we can see orforglipron had a higher A1C reduction than DAPA. The ACHIEVE-3 was head-to-head against oral semaglutide, marketed as Rybelsus. And again, we're seeing a higher A1C reduction there as well. So on the A1C side, orforglipron is really showcasing its A1C reduction ability. There were also body weight changes at week 72 in some of these trials. So we can see a 10% reduction in the overweight or obesity plus type 2 cohort, nearly 8% loss of body weight in the adults with type 2 diabetes and diet and exercise alone. And for ACHIEVE-3, which was the head-to-head against oral semaglutide, a 9% reduction in body weight compared to 5% for Rybelsus. These are some of the phase 3 trials that Lilly has ongoing for orforglipron, so we can see what it's looking to try to achieve with potential expansions of indications. We can see there's a trial for type 2 with obesity with CVD risk. That's expected to read out shortly. Some of the trials looking to read out in 2027 are for overweight and obesity with OSA, with hypertension, with osteoarthritis of the knee pain. And then into 2028, a couple of indications where we haven't seen GLP-1 or incretin treatments have trials. One is for PAD and another is for stress urinary incontinence in women with overweight or obesity, which looks to be an indication that might be for women who have leakage issues, that the weight loss and the using of orforglipron can help with that factor as well. And then looking ahead to 2031 are an outcomes trial looking at either atherosclerosis, cardiovascular disease, or chronic kidney disease. So some of the indications, similar to what we saw with oral Wegovy, this reduces barriers for HCPs with an additional oral option available. Also on the affordability, Lilly has already announced a cash pay price of $149 per month for the starter doses, but they're indicating that it could go up as high as $399 per month for the higher doses that achieve the greater amount of weight loss. Orfo could have possibilities as a switch medication from Wegovy compared to oral sema given the trial results, but with potentially lower efficacy, it might place behind oral semaglutide and treatment algorithms. Next, we'll take a look at CagriSema for chronic weight management, which Novo Nordisk has also submitted to the FDA. The MOA is a fixed dose combination of a long-acting amylin analog, cagrilintide, and the GLP-1 RA that we know and love, semaglutide. The submitted indication thus far is for weight reduction or management for people with overweight or obesity without type 2 diabetes. They're planning for a submission in type 2 diabetes potentially late in 2026. And the dosing is a fixed dose combination, once weekly subcutaneous injection. We'll take a look at the pivotal trial results for CagriSema and chronic weight management that Novo submitted to the FDA. As you can see, Novo conducted trials with CagriSema compared to cagrilintide as well as semaglutide. So we have placebo, CagriSema, and the mean change in body weight at week 68. You can see up to 22% weight loss with CagriSema compared to 16% for semaglutide and almost 12% for Cagra on its own. And we can see now, looking at the percent of respondents who lost more than 25% of their body weight, is 40% for CagriSema. So very high levels of efficacy with high levels of weight loss. There were also signs in the REDEFINE 1 trial that CagriSema is muscle sparing, as Roberto mentioned, as a feature of amylin. Of the weight lost with CagriSema, 67% of the total weight loss was due to body fat mass. Only 33% was lean soft tissue mass loss. So there is some indication that this could be a good option to maintain muscle tone. Looking at the pivotal trial results for type 2 diabetes, which, as a reminder, Novo has not submitted yet, in the REDEFINE 2 trial for adults with obesity or overweight and type 2 diabetes, we can see the A1C change at week 68 was minus 2.1%, and the mean body weight change at week 68 was 15.7% weight loss compared to 3% for placebo. In addition, CagriSema excelled at bringing patients to a state of euglycemia. The FDA has thus far been reluctant to give indications for remission of type 2 diabetes, but 81% of the participants in REDEFINE 2 achieved an A1C of less than 6.5 at the end of the trial. So strong results in the type 2 diabetes front for CagriSema. There are several additional trials ongoing. The REDEFINE program is for the chronic weight management side. So we see trials ongoing to add a 3-point MACE indication, looking at a head-to-head trial versus tirzepatide, which would be Zepbound, maintenance doses, and then looking for higher levels of weight loss. On the Reimagine trial front, which is in type 2 diabetes, there will be the final Reimagine 1 for type 2 diabetes, comparisons with metformin and SGLT2s, basal insulin, and head-to-head trial results versus tirzepatide. All of that is expected in 2026 to support that filing in type 2 diabetes. So our thoughts on potential implications for CagriSema. What you'll notice is that this is a fixed dose combination. It is not a single molecule like tirzepatide is. And historically, fixed dose combinations in type 2 diabetes in particular have been problematic, especially for endos. They like to tinker. It really has slowed down adoption of the basal and GLP-1 combinations that were marketed by both Sanofi and Novo Nordisk. So while tirzepatide didn't have that issue, CagriSema might, because the semaglutide component is well known by endos in particular. On the affordability front, it is likely that Novo could approach pricing similar to, if not higher than, semaglutide subcutaneous. So we'll have to see what the pricing looks like and how that will impact patients, especially consumers that are looking for cash pay. But with the impressive amount of weight loss, the A1C reduction, and the novel MOA, including amylin, CagriSema could become a key competitor to tirzepatide, with many decisions for both consumers and physicians coming down to access, device preferences, and just frankly the availability. Next, we'll look at another potential 2026 or 2027 launch for Eli Lilly, retatrutide for chronic weight management and other indications. This is a single molecule that is a triple agonist. It is working on GIP and GLP, similar to tirzepatide, but also with the addition of glucagon. Glucagon is something that's well known to increase hepatic glucose production and reduce food intake, delaying gastric emptying. So the addition of glucagon could certainly change the way the molecule works and the amount of efficacy it has. The intended indications that Lilly is studying is weight reduction and management for people with overweight and obesity, type 2 diabetes, sleep apnea, osteoarthritis of the knee, MASH, chronic lower back pain, and then CV and renal outcomes. And it's given via a once-weekly subcutaneous injection. Taking a look at the first batch of phase 3 trials, this is for chronic weight management with osteoarthritis of the knee without type 2 diabetes. And we can see the mean weight change is a very robust 28.7% of body weight lost at week 68. We're also seeing a change in the WOMAC score of -4 points compared to -2 points in the placebo group. And for those of you who don't know, that is the Western Ontario and McMaster University's Osteoarthritis Index pain score. Additional secondary endpoints in the TRIUMPH-4 trial showed that Reta reduced known markers of CV risk, including non-HDL, cholesterol, triglycerides, lowered systolic blood pressure, and also alleviated the knee pain. It's well tolerated, but it's important to note that the percent discontinuing due to adverse events was 18% for retatrutide compared to less than 1% for placebo. Looking at some of the phase 2 trial results, again, we see with the phase 2 trial 24% body weight loss at week 48, and everybody in the trial lost at least 5% of their body weight. 83% lost more than 15%. So again, with the 18% discontinuing due to adverse events. Phase 2 trials also looked at Reta compared to dulaglutide, which Lilly markets as Trulicity. This is the phase 2 trial with chronic weight management with type 2 diabetes. We can see an A1C change of 2-point reduction compared to 1.4 for Trulicity, and the body weight change of 17% at week 36. This is a list of all of the trials that are ongoing. So we should see some results from TRIUMPH 1, 2, and 3 in the first half of 2026. So that's all overweight and obese patients. TRIUMPH 1 with sleep apnea and or osteoarthritis, overweight and obesity with type 2, and then overweight and obesity with cardiovascular disease. Later in 2026, we should see the phase 3 results for a head-to-head trial against Lilly's own tirzepatide, and in type 2, some different dose strategies, as well as a head-to-head versus semaglutide. Looking ahead to 2027, we'll see the chronic lower back pain trial results, as well as some additional trials for overweight and obesity without type 2. And then farther out, maintenance doses, dose escalation, and then some outcome trials for ASCVD, chronic kidney disease, and MASH. So the potential implications, as you saw, retatrutide has the potential for really high levels of weight loss that you really approach surgical intervention levels. And that could be game changing, particularly for people with a significant amount of weight to lose. Um, However, it could be too much of a good thing. There was so much weight loss that some participants were exiting the trial because they were afraid of losing too much weight. Um, it can certainly fill a need for patients that have a need for significant weight loss, but I think a question is really whether this will be pigeonholed for the extremely obese patient. And also, would it have limited duration of use given the extensive amount of weight loss it could provide? If this weren't Lilly's drug, one could see a pharma company arguing for Retta to be the first line treatment as really a short term option until the desired amount of weight is lost, and then switching to a maintenance therapy of some kind of oral treatment. But Lilly will need to navigate its own portfolio to avoid really competing with itself once it has Zepbound or Forglipron and then eventually retatrutide in the mix as potential offerings. Moving ahead in time, we're going to switch gears a little bit from the overweight and obesity into the more cardiovascular disease side of the spectrum with pelacarsen from Novartis, which is looking for an indication in CVD reduction risk in patients with elevated levels of Lp(a). It's in phase 3 right now, and it's looking towards a 2027 launch. The MOA for pelacarsen is an antisense oligonucleotide which directly inhibits plasma lipoprotein A production, or Lp(a). Lp(a) is an area that several companies are exploring as a new treatment. For a little bit of information about Lp(a), these levels in the blood can vary greatly between individuals, primarily due to genetic variations, and they don't correlate with LDL-C levels. So even patients with LDL-C that's lowered to target levels still remain at high risk of CV events if they have high levels of Lp(a). And because it's a genetically determined condition, it's not responsive to lifestyle changes. So patients are unable to adequately control their Lp(a) levels through diet or increased physical activity. So pharmacological treatments like pelacarsen could be really the best means for these kinds of patients to prevent cardiovascular events. The dosing for pelacarsen is a monthly subcutaneous injection. So because they're still in phase 3 trials, we have phase 2 trials to look at, which was conducted with 459 patients over 27 weeks. And what we see is the reduction in Lp(a) at 27 weeks of 80% compared to 6% for placebo. And the percent of patients with Lp(a) levels under 50 milligrams per deciliter at 98%. It also showed a modest reduction in LDL-C up to 26%. But again, the focus of the trial is to reduce the percent of Lp(a) in the system. The ongoing programs, we should see results for phase 3 trials in 2026 for Lp(a) with cardiovascular disease, and that's a MACE endpoint. Looking ahead, there is a trial for Lp(a) with atherosclerosis, and that's using also inclisiran. There are also some rollover extension and open label extension programs. So the implications, one of the considerations for Lp(a) is that for any of the pipeline drugs, including pelacarsen, is that this requires additional diagnostic testing, which means HCPs will need to be able to identify potential candidates and then order those blood tests. It's pretty easy to get those blood tests, but it's not something that's currently in the standard battery of tests that the cardiologists are ordering. So it will require a little bit of behavioral change for cards and an understanding of who to screen for this. But the outlook is very promising. There's an increasing understanding that elevated Lp(a) is associated with a risk of early CV events, and there aren't any treatments. And pelacarsen will certainly have the first to market advantage, which we know historically is is a big advantage, but there are other assets. I believe there are two more in late stage trials for Lp(a). We'll turn now to another potential 2027 or 2028 launch. This one for Maritide for chronic weight management and other conditions that's being brought forward by Amgen. The MOA for Maritide is a fixed dose combination of an anti-GIPR mAb, maridebart, and two GLP-1R analog peptides, cafraglutide. So the interesting thing about the MOA for Maritide, it is a GIP/GLP similar to tirzepatide, but there's a difference in the way that they work. Tirzepatide activates both GLP-1 and GIP receptors, which is leveraging the complementary effects of these two incretin hormones. In contrast, Maritide is antagonizing the GIP receptor while activating GLP-1 receptors. So it's kind of taking the opposite approach to tirzepatide, and which is a very novel take on GLP-1. I believe all of the other GLP-1s that we've talked about and that are on the market are receptor agonists. The intended indications that Amgen is studying are weight reduction and management for people with overweight and obesity without type 2 diabetes. They're looking at type 2 diabetes, ASCVD, HFpEF, and heart failure with mildly reduced ejection fraction, sleep apnea, all of those among people with overweight or obesity. The dosing is a subcutaneous injection, and it's under investigation for monthly dosing as well as every 8-week dosing. We don't have any phase 3 trial results yet for Maritide, but we'll take a look at the phase 2 trial results for Maritide in chronic weight management without type 2 diabetes. This is the part 1 of a phase 2 trial, which was 52 weeks with 465 patients. These were folks with obesity or overweight without type 2 diabetes. And we can see the body weight change at week 52 is nearly 20%, compared to 2.6% for placebo, and an A1C change in the patients without diabetes at 0.4% reduction. There's strong treatment efficacy here with monthly or less frequent dosing, and the tolerability at initiation improves with a multi-step dose escalation. The results from the phase 2 trials suggest that even every 8-week or 12-week dosing is possible with some of the dose escalation strategies that Amgen is testing. Looking at the results in the phase 2 trials for chronic weight management for overweight and obese patients with type 2 diabetes, we see an A1C change at week 52 of 2.2 points and a mean change in body weight of 17% for Maritide, and we saw that up to 99% of patients lost 5% of their body weight in the type 2 trial. So the phase 3 results, we haven't seen any of them yet. They'll be coming in 2027. So for the Maritime 1 program, that's a phase 3 trial of overweight and obesity without type 2. Maritime 2 is overweight and obesity with type 2. And then looking ahead farther in 2028 is a sleep apnea phase 3 trial. 2030, we'll see the results for the ASCVD with overweight and obesity and the heart failure trials in 2030. So the potential implications, its efficacy is similar to current GLP-1 options, but as we look forward to 2027 or 2028, it will be a very crowded playing field in the obesity and chronic weight management space. The dosing frequency could be a very attractive option. We know that the chronic weight management space is very consumer driven, and a monthly or even less frequent dosing option could be very appealing and could really move the needle for Maritide. But there are still questions that remain. Because Maritide is taking a different approach to activating GIP/GLP, The phase 2 data has been positive, but the full phase 3 results will really tell the tale if this unique design on those molecules will really reap the rewards that Amgen's looking for. Another 2027 or 2028 potential launch is survodutide for chronic weight management and MASH, being brought forward by BI and Zealand. The MOA here is a dual agonist of glucagon and GLP-1. So glucagon we talked about earlier with retatrutide. So this is glucagon and GLP-1, but without the GIP. The intended indications that BI is studying are for weight reduction and management for people with overweight and obesity, with or without type 2 diabetes. And they're looking at MASH in F1 to F3 phenotype patients as well as cirrhotic patients. And they're looking at cardiovascular outcome trials in overweight and obesity. And survodutide is a once weekly sub-Q injection. So we have phase 2 trial results. BI has not released phase 3 results yet. The phase 2 trial, 387 patients, adults with obesity or overweight without type 2. And the mean change in body weight at week 46 was 18.7%. And the percent losing more than 15% of body weight was 67%, and 40% losing more than 20%. There was quite a bit of potential side effects. So the nausea levels were 63%, vomiting 35%, constipation at 26%. So some potential GI side effects. We'll see if phase 3 trial designs have alleviated any of those pressures. There were also phase 2 trial results for survodutide and MASH. This is among 295 patients, adults with NASH or NAFLD with fibrotic stages of F1 to F3 proven by biopsy. What we see in the results here for MASH resolution with no worsening in fibrosis, 64% of the survodutide patients achieved that. And the same percentage actually achieved improvement in liver fibrosis with no worsening of MASH. So those are among the F2, F3 patient types. We should start to see phase 3 trial results this year in overweight and obesity with and without type 2 diabetes, as well as overweight and obesity with MASH. So those trial results are coming in 2026. 2027, we'll see MASH and fibrosis stage F2 and F3, and MASH with cirrhosis also in 2027. And then 2028, we'll see cardiovascular safety in the outcomes trial, as well as renal outcomes as well. So the implications, the efficacy results are really promising, especially in MASH. But again, in expanding market, that might not be as much of a barrier if the efficacy and safety are strong, particularly in MASH. And the data appears to be very robust in phase 2 and could become best in class for MASH treatments. It looks like they're foregoing a type 2 diabetes indication altogether and focusing more on the chronic weight management and MASH spaces. There could be some issues with access and obesity, given that what we've seen with payers wanting to limit the amount of obesity medications they're giving coverage to. There might also be issues with willingness for patients to undergo frequent biopsies if that becomes required for the MASH indication. But certainly very promising results from the phase 2 trials. Moving ahead to 2028, we have MET 097I, or Pfizer's 3944, which is the chronic weight management and MASH asset that Pfizer acquired with its acquisition of Metsera, which Roberto mentioned earlier. We'll just call it the Metsera asset for ease of naming. The Metsera asset is a GLP-1 RA with the potential to become the first NUSH analog peptide with once monthly dosing, and that stands for nutrient stimulated hormone targets. The intended indication is for weight reduction or management for people with overweight and obesity, with or without type 2, and then other indications are to be determined. And again, this is a once monthly sub-Q injection. We've not seen much data released, so the Metsera asset phase 2 results among 387 patients. This is for adults with obesity and overweight without type 2. We see a placebo-adjusted weight change of 14%. Metsera did not release the placebo amount or the total amount of weight change, and the placebo-adjusted risk difference in tolerability was similar for diarrhea, a little higher for vomiting and nausea. So not much data is publicly available on their phase 2 trials. On the phase 3 front, since Pfizer just completed its acquisition about a month ago, we know there's a phase 3 trial scheduled to read out in 2027 in overweight and obese patients without type 2. Pfizer just recently announced they're planning to launch 10 additional phase 3 trials to be completed in 2027 and 2028, but the details of what they're planning are not available. I think the CEO announced that at the JPM conference just a few weeks back. So the implications for the Metsera asset. After this public bidding war between Pfizer and Novo for Metsera, we think the pressure is on to deliver a blockbuster. With a long half-life, the monthly or even less frequent dosing with strong efficacy could be a very big differentiator in a crowded future market. And also, in addition to this lead asset, Pfizer acquired other assets that it will trial in combination. Specifically, they acquired an amylin analog and also potentially oral formulations. So we know that Pfizer is looking to go all in this space, but again, we've not seen much data from this asset. We also have another potential 2028 launch to cover. This is amycretin for chronic weight management in type 2. This is from Novo. It's a novel unimolecular GLP-1 and amylin receptor agonist. They're studying it in weight reduction and management for people with overweight and obesity without type 2, and they're also studying it in type 2. And it's currently in phase 2 trials, both as a once daily oral and a once weekly subcutaneous option. So the phase 2 results that they've released thus far are in chronic weight management with type 2 diabetes. We can see A1C changes of 1.5 and 1.8% for the oral and sub-Q forms of amycretin, and body weight reduction at week 36 of 10% and 15% for the oral and sub-Q versions, respectively. The phase 3 trial results are all expected to hit in 2028. So that's the AMAZE program. AMAZE 1 is overweight and obesity without type 2. And we have AMAZE 2 for overweight and obesity with type 2. And there, Novo's also has phase 3 trials for sleep apnea, for knee pain from osteoarthritis, and then also overweight and obesity with type 2, and that's testing against the oral amycretin. Potential programs in ASCVD, heart failure, chronic kidney disease, but those have not been initiated yet. So amycretin in both oral and sub-Q forms will face a really crowded market and potentially the generic forms of semaglutide. But with the offerings potentially in both oral and sub-Q formulations, Novo appears to be hoping it can replicate the success of having both oral and sub-Q forms of semaglutide, and it could make it an attractive option for prescribers that could choose either option depending on what the patient, what their needs and their barriers are. We'll now look for our next 2028 potential launch. This is pegozafermin for MASH by Roche with 89 Bio. in their acquisition that Roberto mentioned earlier. So the MOA is an FGF21, which is the fibroblast growth factor 21. I believe Roberto mentioned this earlier. It's a leading mechanism of action in MASH with advanced fibrosis, F2, F3 phenotypes, and compensated cirrhosis, which is F4. The intended indications are for MASH in moderate and severe fibrotic patients, which is F2 and F3, as well as cirrhotic patients at the F4 stage, as well as severe hypertriglyceridemia. I am not a scientist. Hopefully you can read it. And the dosing is a once weekly subcutaneous injection, is also being tested every 2 weeks. Phase 2 trial results that were released among 222 patients. These are adults with biopsy-confirmed NASH and stages F2 or F3. There was results here that were released from phase 2 were for the teal bar is a weekly option. The dark blue bar is the every 2-week option. We're seeing similar levels of around 22 to 25% of MASH resolution with no worsening in fibrosis, and 26% improvement in liver fibrosis with no worsening of MASH. Having multiple dosing regimens could be a potential benefit. We think patients would probably prefer the every 2-week option, but it certainly gives Roche some options as they're moving forward with phase 3 trials. There are 3 phase 3 trials ongoing. The SHTG trial results in phase 3 should hit in 2026, 2029 for the cirrhosis trial, and then 2031 for the MASH F2, F3 trials. So the potential indications, the MASH market is rapidly changing. There are drugs available that are specifically indicated, and incretins are already gaining indications there, and requirements for biopsies are also presenting a challenge as some of the barriers Roche faces. But the outlook is promising, especially for the first in the new class of treatments of FGF21, which might be an option that could be combined with incretin treatments, potentially in the same injection. So the full trial results will really reveal the likely opportunity as we see how well some of these assets and MOAs are able to treat the condition of MASH. We've talked through a lot of data. This slide, as well as the next one, is meant to be directional only. We've plotted out, so for all of the assets that we talked about, the different amounts of weight loss at the different levels of weeks in the clinical trial results that we looked at. The red circles are Lilly assets, the blue circles are Novo assets, the orange circles are others. And as we kind of look at the way things are spread out, retatrutide tends to have the most powerful amount of weight loss, nearing 30%. The oral options, Wegovy oral, CagriSema oral, or Orforglipron, tend to have the least amount of weight loss, but then the trade-off there is the preferred style of dosing for many consumers. We'll take a look now at similar analysis on the type 2 diabetes trials that we just talked you through. Again, these should be comparisons only. They're directional. These were not head-to-head trials. But one of the insights that we see here is that the longer the trials were extended, the greater the A1C reduction. Perhaps that's because giving patients a longer time to be on treatment resulted in greater A1C reduction, or perhaps it's just the nature of the molecule themselves. But what we do see is that there's room for potential A1C lowering capability that's stronger than what Mounjaro and Ozempic are currently providing. And with that, I will pass the presentation back over to Roberto.
Thank you, Scott.
In this last section, let's get back to the current landscape, as we are observing significant changes in the clinical and access dynamics, which again predicts what may come next. And for this last section, we're also going to show you some Ipsos data. And we structure that around 5 trends that we're observing in our studies. So the first trend is that GLP-1s are now in the popular culture and patients take the lead. You're probably very aware of these already. But according to our data, 74% of the US population is aware of these medications. This is a huge percentage considering that we're talking about medications. Unlike other therapy areas, however, only 20% of people heard about these drugs from a medical professional. Instead, traditional and social media are key channels where people first hear about these drugs, 42% and 34% respectively. And again, from our data, including some ethnographic work, where we spent a lot of time with patients and also social media listening, we see that GLP-1s are moving from medical to lifestyle. So people tell us that they see GLP-1s as an effective solution for losing weight after many attempts and many products that have claimed to solve weight loss, only then to leave people stuck in a cycle of losing and gaining weight. A solution to not only lose weight, but also to meet lifestyle needs. These are another lens through which people see GLP-1s. So for example, they see that as a solution for improving wellness, health, energy levels, and also reducing food noise. And all of this without the stigma of taking a medication, which instead can be a barrier in other therapy areas. So in a nutshell, people are telling us that they love GLP-1s, they love these drugs, and almost see them as a miracle, as this patient in EOE said to us, for example. The prescriber role is also changing, and this is the second trend. Endocrinologists and bariatric specialists adopted GLP-1s first, and we know that they historically really had a high adoption of these medications. But what we see now is that primary care and general internal medicine are also increasing adoption. And this is also thanks to the GLP-1 approval for MASH, moving management of this condition upstream. Cardiologists, liver specialists, and nephrologists historically focus on specific or separate outcomes, but now are increasingly adopting GLP-1s, recognizing its metabolic and systemic benefit. The organizational challenge is that these actors historically have not communicated, or at least not so often. There is an infrastructure to be built, indeed. Some healthcare systems are doing well, others have not yet. And this is an implementation barrier that will shape market adoption over the short to medium term. And the clinical practice framework has also shifted. Clinicians have long understood that obesity and insulin resistance drive type 2 diabetes, CVD, CKD, and MASH. But the available pharmacotherapy didn't support that understanding. Now, with GLP-1s, basically they can treat the root cause of these conditions. And that flips the treatment sequence. Historically, glucose first, as we talked about earlier, and weight second, and cardiac outcomes as a bonus. But now the metabolic weight control first actually is the first objective, and glucose control as a great byproduct, whereby cardiac and renal protection have become primary benefits. And so this obesity first paradigm is fundamental and already supported by major guidelines, as we saw earlier. And we see that in Ipsos data as well. Between 50 to 64% of HCPs in our obesity and cardiometabolic therapy monitor say that they treat both comorbidities at the same time. So not sequentially, simultaneously. And in our MASH therapy monitor, we see that 48% of MASH patients on GLP-1 are prescribed these for obesity and coexisting conditions, not the liver alone. Regulatory advancements can also impact diagnosis. When the disease has no treatment, you don't screen aggressively. You don't look for what you cannot treat. But post-approval, specialists screen more, diagnose more, and initiate treatment more. And indeed, 57% of European liver specialists that we talked to reported that in one of that they explicitly expect an increase in MASH diagnosis. This is definitely a good thing, but it also creates a real implementation challenge that healthcare systems need to anticipate this over the next 18 to 24 months. In this context, payers have emerged as dominant gatekeeper. And this is the fourth trend. They use prior authorization as a key lever in the US. This is a critical insight for understanding market strategy. Prior authorization is supposed to gate based on medical necessity. In practice, however, it gates based on indication framing. So we're talking about the same molecule, the same patient, and the same clinical benefit. However, as you can see here on in this table, approval rates change significantly based on how the indication is positioned. So when GLP-1s are positioned as obesity treatment, we have a between 10 and 12% PA approval on Medicare Part D, and up to 50% on commercial insurance. When positioned as a cardiometabolic prevention, however, we see up to 28% approval rate on Medicare and up to 70% on commercial. That's really a big, impressive difference, which is 2 to 3-fold. And SGLT2 also show identical pattern. This expands on what we saw earlier, that indication expansions into cardiometabolic endpoints isn't just a clinical advancement, is an access strategy. Because payers don't prioritize the underlying efficacy, actually they're tiering based on how the benefit is framed. And finally, the fifth trend we are seeing is that this is the emergence of new business models. And this is the market response to payer gatekeeping. When insurance access is restricted, manufacturers build channels that they can control. And this is especially true, of course, in the US, where what we are seeing is that the direct-to-consumer is a new live channel. To give you an example, LilyDirect and NovoCare are channels implemented to capture the massive segment of informed self-paying patients. And they offer transparent and strongly discounted pricing. Retail partnerships are also expanding. Lilly and Amazon Pharmacy, Novo Nordisk and GoodRx, both these companies with Walmart and Costco collaboration. And this means that GLP-1s are integrated into consumer platforms with millions of users. So not just pharmacy distribution, consumer platform integration. And to give you another example, very recently, HCA Hospitals, a massive employer group, dropped GLP-1 coverage entirely, directing employees to manufacturer programs. And when employers stop covering obesity drugs, payers lose the bargaining power as well. And distribution, again, shifting to DTC and retail. And this is all. This was our last slide, and we are now ready for Q&A. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Very comprehensive and informative presentations. Wonderful. We do have time for Q&A. We've had questions come in online. We'll go ahead and start through those. I and my colleague Shisheng Miao will moderate this. I'll start with a question about combinations. The question is, any comment on the prospects of combination therapy, GLP-1 with FGF21, I assume, might be a typo there, or THR beta for MASH? So combination therapy prospects there. Is that one you can field?
Yeah, I can take this one. And it's a great question because mechanistically we saw that the GLP-1s, FG21 analogs, and THR beta agonists are very complementary in MASH. So we saw that GLP-1s drive systemic metabolic and weight loss effects, while the other two agents are more liver direct and fibrosis focus. So definitely there is a clear rationale for combination therapy. So now clinically, we already see that resmetirom, so the THR beta agonist, and semaglutide contribute to different strengths. So it's really natural and it's confirmed by the clinical practice that combinations like that can be very attractive. In terms of evidence, however, the evidence and the data are still building, let's say. Definitely GLP-1 plus FGF21 is further along. In particular, Kairos FGF21 analog has phase 2 data in MASH with patients with type 2 diabetes and GLP-1s. So showing really added histological and metabolic benefits. And I know that I think they're now moved that into phase 3, so where we should have more data than in the combination. But for the other one, the GLP-1 plus the THR beta agonist, there are no clinical trial, as far as you know, at least at the moment. However, what we see is that physicians in a clinical practice are already combining the two and already prescribing the two. So again, this is very promising, but still needs confirmation, of course, from dedicated trials. I don't know, Scott, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Pegoza Furman mentioned, at least when 89 Bio was in the lead, was that it was available to be co-formulated with GLP-1. So I think they're thinking of that. And then Roberto had mentioned that some of the acquisitions in the MASH space in particular, we see Novo Nordisk acquiring an FGF21. Madrigal acquiring an oral GLP-1. I would imagine there will be clinical trials, if not already underway, early stage, and ongoing for both of those companies to explicitly test the combination as a way to kind of extend the exclusivity of their drugs and just kind of continue to consolidate like the ability of those drugs to be used for both obesity as well as MASH together.
Great, thank you. Excellent answers there. Shisheng, if you're able, I believe you had a question.
Well, actually,
about.
there is a question about DDI. So the question is, are there differences in the DDI drug-drug interaction liability between orforglipron and Rybelsus? Actually, I'd like to take up this question. For those of you who have known me, actually, many people know me as Mr. PBSS. Actually, most people probably don't realize I am a hardcore scientist and drug developer with some expertise in chemistry, biochemistry, drug metabolism, PK, and clinical pharmacology. I did do some research, at least literature research, on the DDI concerns of these GLP-1 agonists. So obviously, you hear the difference is between peptide molecules and small molecules. As we know, Rybelsus is the brand name of semaglutide for diabetes, and that's the oral version. And the oral version of semaglutide, recently approved for obesity, actually is not Rybelsus, even though it's probably the same tablet. Actually, is called oral Wegovy, right? So basically, Rybelsus is semaglutide oral. Orforglipron is also the oral version of GLP-1 agonist from Eli Lilly. And that one is not a peptide. It's a small molecule, albeit a pretty large small molecule. I think a molecular weight is about 800 or something. Because of that, the clearance pathway is very different for orforglipron versus semaglutide. As we know, semaglutide, as we said, is a peptide, and its clearance pathway is primarily proteolysis. So therefore, there will not be concerns in terms of the drug-drug interaction with CYP3/4 inhibitors or inducers. But on the other hand, orfor, being a small molecule, is primarily cleared by CYP3A4 based on my reading. So therefore, there would be potential concern of orfor as a victim of CYP3/4 inhibitors or inducers. But based on my literature search, I have not found data on how big an effect from a CYP3/4 inducer or inhibitor, even though there was a DDI study with a strong CYP3/4 inhibitor in the clinicaltrials.gov database. Because this drug has not been approved by the FDA yet, it's under FDA review. I think the PDUFA date, I believe, is coming up pretty soon in April or June under the National Review Priority Voucher. So we don't know until it comes to the market in about a few months. But definitely, there might be, there will be some drug-drug interaction concerns, but how big a concern, we don't know yet. Okay, so with that, actually, there are some really good other questions from the audience. Some of the questions, I guess, we as a panel in here may not be able to address. So we'd like to invite the audience members who wish to address some of these questions or ask questions live. Please speak up. You can type in the Q&A box. Let us know you'd like to speak live, and then we can elevate you to a panelist so that you can comment live. So this is an experiment we're doing today since the panel is pretty small. I think there's a question from Priya. There are really good questions in there. We may not be able to address, but if there are any audience members who would like to address these questions or any other questions or raise additional questions live, please just type in to the QA box, and we will enable you to be able to speak live. Okay, Dean, back to you.
Yeah.
To moderate the
Yeah. Thank you, Shishang. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for the comprehensive DDI answer. So I guess we'll just have to wait to see the labels, right, to learn more
Yes.
about those under study. So to Roberto and Scott, question, can you address the concerns of weight rebound after drug stoppage? It's a pretty widely known aspect of these therapies, as well as the muscle loss with the GLP-1 receptor agonists, and how those might compare to the new candidates, or how those might be partially or well addressed by the new candidates. So weight rebound and muscle loss. Comments?
Sure, I can start, and then Roberto, if you have anything to add, please do. I think we don't know for a fact that people will have to stay on these medications for life, but if I were placing bets, that's where I would place bets. I think we've seen anecdotally that if people come off the treatments, that there would be weight gain. I don't know if it would be all the way, but certainly because of the way these drugs work to kind of inhibit how much people are eating. I think, if you remove that, I think you would start to see the weight gain. Some of the trials that we saw, particularly for, I think it was orforglipron, we're looking at potential maintenance doses. So I think it might not necessarily be that someone would need to stay on a Wegovy or a Zepbound forever. It might be a thing where you're switching to something that's maybe less efficacious at a lower dose as like a maintenance treatment. And I think we'll start to see some of these drugs, particularly I would imagine the orals would be a good option, potentially something like a Maritide that might be monthly or quarterly even, that could be something to kind of help maintenance. So not something that's intended for weight loss, but something that's more intended to prevent weight gain. On the muscle sparing side, I think we've seen some trials for other molecules that we didn't talk about that we're looking to be studied in combination with GLP-1s, is particularly specifically for muscle sparing. I think Regeneron might have had one at some phase of trial, but I would imagine that any of the drugs that we looked at that have a combination with amylin in particular might be able to have some muscle sparing properties without a person needing to take multiple drugs. So I think that's something that will continue to be studied, and I think it's certainly an appealing option for development of new molecules or things that would spare lean body mass, so that the weight loss is primarily fat loss.
Yes, yeah, anything to add? If not, that is definitely one of the directions that the market is evolving to. So going towards more like quality of weight loss rather than quantity. And that's a way for differentiated these new molecules that recently, different companies in the amylin space, especially as Scott said, are really pursuing.
Yeah, recently I've seen some data showing that some drug candidates not only can reduce, can cause weight loss, but also can increase muscle mass increase, right? So definitely that's a direction. So on the DDI issue, one of the audience members made a comment. I think this is a really good one, suggesting that the DDI probably could be beyond the clearance through CP inhibition, because of both semaglutide and orfo inhibit gastric emptying, therefore may cause drug-drug interaction concerns on other drugs. I don't know who wrote that question. It might be our friend Joe Ware, because he did make another point about gastric emptying related DDI in one of his comments. Joe, if you can hear us, actually we elevated you, so now you can unmute yourself and make a comment if you want.
Hey,
or
good morning,
anybody else.
Yeah, good morning. what a wonderful, wonderful overview of the space. And I really appreciated all the effort that Scott and Roberto and the organizing committees put in. I think this is really an interesting drug-drug interaction because it's one, when we talk about physiologically based PK, we talk about, all those classic factors that you mentioned, Shi Chung. But what really happens with both the peptides and the oral small molecules is that they delay gastric emptying. And for certain drugs, that matters, right? And I just think that's something to pay attention to. Not that you want to do like Novo has done 23 or so healthy volunteer clin farm studies, but there's an opportunity for PBPK modeling. And I just put that out there. There's not an FDA guidance yet at this point, but maybe this is an area that PBSS can take the lead on hosting, a presentation about that. I think the boundaries of this DDI have been studied with drugs with a narrow therapeutic index, but potentially there may be additional challenges, like specific drug interactions that would need to be considered. But part of the physiology, the pharmacology of GLP-1 agonists is the satiety that was mentioned, but that satiety comes from delayed gastric emptying. So if you take a handful of pills, right, that changes. I can't even tell you if it changes if it's different between sub-Q and oral peptides or orforglipron. I know the Lilly group has done a really nice job. They published a really good PBPK paper right at the end of 2025. So maybe there's enough substance to organize a workshop there. But I think it's very exciting. I think these new medications and drug assets are changing a lot of lives. So I'm very excited for patients and for drug developers. Thank you.
Well, that's great, Joe. Well, glad our experiment worked. So any of you in the audience, if you would like to speak up, let us know. Type in the Q&A box, let us know your name so that we can elevate you as well. Thanks, Joe, for making the comment. So definitely that's a very, very interesting point how these GLP-1s can affect gastric emptying, therefore affecting the PK absorption of other drugs the patients may take. So actually, if you try to develop a slow release drug and you cannot have a formulation like that, maybe you should get your patients to take a GLP-1 to help you achieve that slow release. Now, that's a joke.
It's possible, but it's very unpredictable, right? So
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
very time dependent. Everybody has their own, I think all of these other GI effects, whether it's nausea, vomiting, and or constipation and diarrhea, all relate to the uniqueness of each individual. But it is an exciting crossroads that people are going to have to think hard about.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely, we can incorporate this topic in a future PBSS workshop. Actually, speaking of that, we are in the process of organizing a workshop or symposium on discovery and development and oral delivery of peptide therapeutics. Probably that will happen towards the end of the year. Obviously, that's a very hot field, especially in cardiometabolic area. So stay tuned for that workshop. If you are interested in contributing as a speaker, please let us know as well. Okay, back to you, Dave.
Yeah, thank you very much. Excellent discussion. Question for Barrow and Scott. Can you comment on the sort of generic slash biosimilar landscape? Certainly as we look at weight loss and certainly some generics coming on ex-US in the near future, US perhaps a little after that. How is that seen as impacting the landscape? And when?
Okay, I can start with that. And perhaps the best way to answer that is also to link that to the timelines, right, that you mentioned in. So we already have some biosimilars or generics in the GLP-1 space, which is ligaglutide. We do see some uptake in some of the countries, so the uptake is quite good, but still quite modest. And we see, and it's just speculation, right? But from what we know, I say branded GLP-1s are definitely still in demand, are not too much affected. But things may change, and we are going to have two waves next in terms of generics coming in. So the first one is actually very soon. So right now, so in 2026, semaglutide is going to lose their patent in some of the markets, especially in Asia, but also in Canada, I think. I will need to double check that. So definitely biosimilars or generics product are expected to launch very soon. Now it's difficult to predict the impact because this is such a new market, unique from many point of views, and we see that as I mentioned one of the slides that it is very, say, consumer-driven market. So where the brand really matters a lot, and the brands also create expectations of quality and efficacy. So let's see there. But the last wave then will come much later in the early 2030s and will be in the US, Europe, and Japan. Again, but by that time, the GLP-1 market, obesity market, will be very different from the current one. So we will see the impact of generics.
Okay, great. Thank you. Scott, anything to add on that, or is that Roberto pretty
No,
much?
I think that's great. Certainly, part of me would imagine that in particular for something that's injectable, the device itself would be a differentiating factor. So can you have, one of the good auto injectors that Lilly or Novo or adept at making versus something that might be less appealing. But what we've seen over the past year, when there was such a challenge for those companies to produce enough device and drug, um, people were willing to do anything, including vial and syringe, which to me, as just a person, would be the most least appealing option. So I would imagine that there would be all kinds of opportunities for generic manufacturers to partner with different kinds of third-party platforms to go more direct to consumer and to really try to sell as much as possible at as low a price as possible. And I think that there would probably be a lot of impact there. So I'm interested to see what we see in sales data, what we see in Roberto's syndicated data to suggest how that uptake changes. But I think there's enough demand that people are willing to accept any kind of terrible experience, including vial syringe, which the industry has mostly moved past, but is kind of back. So,
Gotcha. Thank you. And while we're talking about marketplace, early in your presentation, you mentioned $36 billion in M&A, very active landscape there. Have we seen the top, or is that likely to continue at current pace, continue to grow? Any crystal ball insights there?
Okay, yeah, again, just we are on the speculation area. I think there is going to be more merger acquisition or deals. We have a few molecules, a few companies out there which have been, at least in the past, deemed to be very attractive, like Viking Therapeutics, and many others actually with assets. So the pipeline is huge, and I won't be surprised if we have more deals this year or the next.
yeah, I completely agree. Again, we don't know anything, but I think if Novo in particular was willing to spend, what was it, like $10 billion to get Metsera and didn't, they clearly have money they would like to spend. And I would imagine that other pharma companies, maybe Pfizer has spent theirs, but there are probably some other large pharma players that aren't quite in this space all the way yet, would probably have quite a big appetite to try to get in on this area, potentially around the fringes. But for sure, I would imagine this will continue.
Great, thank you. Question from online. Any comments on the mitigation of GI side effects? We talked about weight rebound and muscle loss. The GI side effects are well precedented. Any mitigation or emerging trends in that profile with the new therapies?
I can take this a little bit. I think what we've seen a lot of companies do is try to design their trials in such a way to mitigate them. So a lot of different kinds of titration or dosing strategies. I think Lilly was the first one to really do this with tirzepatide. There were some signals coming out of phase 2. I remember one KOL was published saying that there's a fine line between medicine and poison, and tirzepatide was looking like it was getting close to poison, but Lilly redesigned some of their phase 3 trials to try to mitigate that, and I think that's been very, very successful with the way that they've kind of approached the titration to try to minimize those side effects. So I think, and what we saw, and even in the assets that we talked about today, a lot of different dose escalation, different levels of dosing, again, to try to mitigate that as much as possible. I mean, the more powerful these agents are, the more they're going to have GI side effects. But I would imagine that through trial design, that will get mitigated, as well as prescribers kind of learning how to help patients manage the expectations and how to manage the symptoms.
Yeah, and just to add to that, perhaps bringing also different perspective, a different lens, and more from a marketing background. And we see also industries that are not in the pharmaceutical space necessarily, but they are maybe in the consumer space, which are developing products targeted really to help people taking a GLP-1 to mitigate their side effects. So there is really a growing industry there. So products that are called the GLP-1 companion products to really help these side effects. But even in the pharma space, we have a few players that are developing or testing products that might help with some of the side effects, and probably there will be then studying combinations with GLP-1s in clinical trial as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Question about MASH. It seems to be, it's not a prevalent indication in many of the trials that you indicated, particularly for just exclusive GLP-1 receptor agonism. Is FGF21 really becoming the go-to mechanism for targeting MASH, or where does MASH fit into these combos where they don't seem so prevalent in the trials?
Okay, I can start taking this one. So whether FGF21 is going to be the more, one of the new promising frontiers, we will have to see, of course, based on the data, but definitely the activities in terms of deals and acquisition we showed earlier definitely points to that direction. This is a very promising molecule. And perhaps the other side of this of my answer is more related to the prevalence of MASH, and again, it's just me speculating on that and why we don't have many trials of MASH. So MASH is a very underdiagnosed condition, and there is a lot of overlap with obesity as well. So it may make sense that companies are more like prioritizing their efforts in obesity and as well as other comorbidities that help them also expand the market beyond MASH and beyond obesity.
I see. So arguably more a business and portfolio decision versus, say, an efficacy safety decision.
Yeah, I'm sure that efficacy and safety are also considered, but that's the portfolio perspective is also definitely on the table.
Yeah, I think another issue, and I agree with what Roberto said, but another issue I think is just the need for biopsy. And as long as the labels require biopsy, I think that is a really big barrier for diagnosis and even treatment. If an obese or an overweight patient presents, and you're going to treat them with a GLP-1, do you need to take the extra step of regular liver biopsy? for the MASH place. So I would imagine one of the opportunities in the near term would be some kind of consistent, less invasive testing and monitoring of liver for MASH and cirrhosis than biopsy, because to me that seems like a pretty big barrier, both for prescriber and for patient.
Yeah, any visibility on biomarkers there, or some sort of, to your point, less invasive endpoint?
I don't know enough specifically. Maybe someone on the line does. I know that there's been talk of some kinds of secondary endpoints or ways to get at it through blood marker testing that aren't biopsies, but I don't think the FDA has accepted them yet. But to me, that's where we would probably need to go for more widespread adoption. But I'm not a scientist and I don't know.
I think the GE DextraScan platform works and it's portable. So I mean, I think there's been pretty solid correlations built with that, whether or not it's clinically accepted at all yet. But I think that I've at least heard from one of my clinicians that was doing this work at like remote access locations like Hawaii and different surrounding islands there. But it's DextraScan GE. I think there is like literature precedent there, but you're right. There's not like a single biomarker like there is for even kidney, serum creatinine function.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Joe. So there are a couple questions related to the gene therapies in development for GLP-1s and obesity. If there are members of the audience who are familiar with that topic, please let us know, and we'll let you speak. And also, there are a couple questions related to some very rare vision loss with the GLP-1s. I don't know if Roberto and Scott are aware of them. Again, we'd like to hear from the audience as well.
I can only mention that there was an issue that emerged a couple of years ago, and it seemed like, yeah, I don't know if then the further trials, further data supported that, so I'm not aware of that.
I'm not either.
Okay. Let me just scroll through the questions here, see what we should cover. A market question, a sense of how large the market is for disease prevention in CKD, CVD, cirrhosis. How does that stack up to the other indications?
Good question. I can start. I can start with this one. And definitely for disease prevention, CKD, CVD, and cirrhosis, the market is very large because these conditions are all very quite prevalent, especially of course CKD and CVD, cirrhosis and less so. It's more niche, but they're driven, of course, by a common widespread risk factors like hypertension, diabetes, and obesity, and then alcohol, of course. So definitely, these risk factors are very spread, and I don't. So this also is definitely a big potential big market there. I wouldn't know in terms of sales, but definitely in terms of prevalence, it involves a lot of patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you raised the point about dialysis, chronic dialysis resonating
Yes,
with payers, something like $90,000 per year or something. So it's that I would imagine there's a lot of opportunity on the resource utilization and sort of real world endpoints there on CKD in particular.
correct.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Shishang.
yeah. So those in the audience who are chemists, probably they are fascinated with the cost of good. of these GLP-1 peptide drugs. We know they are pretty big molecules, molecular weight 4,000 to 5,000. Obviously, the cost of good is pretty expensive. But on the other hand, what's interesting is if you look at the dose for the sub-Q injection of semaglutide, I think it's a 2.4 milligram once a week, right? Of course, you have to do dose titration and so on. So, let's assume it's 2.4 milligrams per week. And then if you look at the oral version of semaglutide, which got approved recently for obesity, is a daily oral drug, and the daily dose is 25 milligrams. Okay, so that means it's 10 times high, and that's a daily dose. So that means the annual dose amount for the oral semaglutide is 70 times, 70, almost like 100 times higher than that of the semaglutide sub-Q injection. Yet the pricing for the oral semaglutide is pretty low, right? $149 per month or something, probably lower than that of the sub-Q injection. So that tells you, even though it's a huge peptide, huge molecule, actually the cost of good is still pretty low. Still small fraction of the monthly $149. So I thought that's very interesting.
Is that because of just the cost of manufacturing of the subcutaneous version, or do you think some of that is just the device cost itself?
Yeah, I think most of the device cost, right? So obviously the oral capsule, I don't know whether it's a tablet or
I think it's a tablet.
Tablet, obviously it's a lot easier than the sub-Q injection, which is an injector, right? Probably that auto-injector is a lot more costly than the drug it contains inside, that 2.4 milligram. Yeah. So that's interesting. And some of you may be curious, why do they need a much higher dose for the oral than for sub-Q? So the reason is pretty simple. This is a huge molecular weight about 5,000. And the oral bioavailability for large molecules is always low. And in this case, the oral bioavailability of semaglutide is less than 1%, actually 0.8%, which is unthinkable until recent years. We in drug development, me as a chemist and a DMPK scientist, we always tell the chemists that we'll design a molecule that can be absorbed well, so that the oral bioavailability is at least 25%, so that you don't end up with a horse pill, or you don't have a huge oral variability in the exposure. Because when you have very low oral bioavailability, you can have huge population variability. Well, in the case of oral semaglutide, Novo Nordisk really proved us wrong. They really changed the conventional wisdom. So actually, you don't need to have a high oral bioavailability value greater than 25% or 50% if your variability is not very high, if your dose burden is manageable. In this case, 25 milligrams daily. Yeah, so that's a very, very interesting case study, and that's an amazing contribution Novo Nordisk contributed.
Yeah, and I suppose an add-on to that would be, and if the market opportunity is gigantic, you can find a way. Yeah, Shishang, thinking of how many compounds, how many candidates have we seen killed before they were born, essentially, because of those low oral bioavailability numbers, and now we're seeing that there might be.
Yeah, so obviously the market plays a very important. Yeah, obviously marketing here plays a very important role, right? If the small market orphan indication, obviously probably you don't want your cost of good to be more than 5%, a few percent of your sale price, right? But for something like this, because the mass market, or even if your cost of good is 20% of your pill, or your gross profit margin is still 80%. Yeah, so that's a really interesting angle in terms of the cost of good, oral bioavailability, and so on.
Yeah, well beyond Lipinski's rules. A quick, simple question. There was something mentioned towards the end there. I think it was Scott or Roberto. I don't remember which. Food noise reduction. Can you comment on what the heck food noise reduction is?
Yeah, I can take this one. So one of the benefits of GLP-1s for people living with obesity is that sometimes people living with obesity have these, let's say, intrusive thoughts about food, thinking about food all the time, or in unexpected ways. And so GLP-1s, for the way the mechanism works, really help reduce these cravings. And this is actually something that consumers we talk with really appreciate. It's something that really can help them every day and really improve their experience with these drugs.
Okay.
I don't think it's something that is in any of the labels yet, though.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
don't think it's
We haven't heard
something that anyone can talk about. I don't know if any of the trials have that as a potential secondary endpoint or if anybody, but I would imagine at some point for some of these drugs, maybe a little bit farther out in the pipeline, might try to get something in the label about reducing food noise because I could see that being something that just from a marketing standpoint could be a real hook if they're allowed to say it. I mean, the commercial kind of directs itself, doesn't it? So
Yeah, I think that's something as this market just continues to age and advance, some of these secondary endpoints, real world endpoints, long-term endpoints, resource utilization, subjective experience, and so forth. Those will emerge and become more powerful.
Yeah. Dean, there's a follow-up comment from the audience regarding the oral bioavailability for the GLP-1s. It's a very good comment. Basically, this audience member commented that for oral GLP-1s, oral bioavailability greater than 1% will be best in class, right? Just now we said the oral semaglutide oral bioavailability is less than 1%, 0.8%, right? And then this person continues, cyclopeptides like the Merck PCSK9 oral drug, the oral bioavailability is 2 to 5%, which is the tops. That comment is true in the context of these peptide drugs. But there are GLP-1 agonists that are not peptides, as we talked about examples like orforglipron, which is a large small molecule. And actually, the oral bioavailability of orforglipron is a whopping 79%, actually. Yeah. So obviously, in the case of Eli Lilly's oral GLP-1, they will have probably a humongous advantage in lower cost of good because it is a small molecule. The cost of good will be lower. The oral bioavailability is quite high. I don't know what their dose level is. I can find out easily. Yeah. So anyway, that's a very good point. Yeah. Back to you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just looking at the time. We're nearing the end of our designated panel discussion. I don't know, Shishang, if you have any final questions or thoughts before we wrap up.
No. So it's definitely, based on all the questions we have seen and a lot of good, or quite a few comments from the audience. The audience really enjoyed this very comprehensive, albeit pretty high level overview of the field. Definitely, there have been a lot of great questions, great discussions. Really want to thank Roberto and Scott for your efforts in preparing for the presentations and making all these great slides for us. Definitely want to thank you for your contribution and for making this collaboration be a success. Definitely, we look forward to future collaborations on other topics in other therapeutic areas, since you guys at Ipsos have a lot of experts in various therapeutic areas. Yeah. Okay, with that, Dean, back to you to close this session.
Yeah, I think Shishang, you said much of it. Couldn't say it better myself. Additional thanks to Roberto and Scott, who clearly from the presentation did a lot of work behind the scenes putting this together. So we're very grateful to them. We're very grateful to all the attendees taking time out of your busy schedules to join us here. And I would also say that I'd ask you to continue to follow PBSS. We mentioned in the introduction, pbss.org. Our website there lists events as they emerge. I think we did nearly 50 events last year across the various chapters. So we are very active on this and many other topics, as you saw during Shishang's introduction. So continue to follow us there. Follow us on LinkedIn as well. Your support and your interest is what makes events like this possible. So we're grateful to all of you. And with that, we will close out this session. And
And I do want to add something.
Yep.
When the audience leaves the Zoom meeting, they will see a pop-up on the screen for the survey. Please do take a minute to fill out that survey. We do learn a lot from these comments, suggestions from the audience. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. So with that, we'll close today's session. Thanks again to everybody and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.